One of the things that often stuns people learning about the Nazis for the first time is the sheer amount of information available to us about them, authored by the Nazis. In this video, we will tell you about 5 infamous documents detailing the evil of the Nazi regime. One of these documents isn't on paper. Instead, it's on audio tape, recorded in October 1943 in Poznan, Poland. The recording of SS-Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler speaking to an assembled bunch of SS officers is today housed in the US National Archives. We will tell you more about the content of the speech in a few moments. If you're a person interested in World War II and Nazi Germany, please like and subscribe to our channel to help us bring more content like this to you. Before we tell you about the worst evils of the Nazi regime, let's talk first about some of the political machinations they attempted far away from the battlefields of Europe. Many scandals have rocked the British monarchy in the last 4 decades, and the royals continue to make headlines today. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle and the renunciation of their positions and moving to the United States, and the involvement of Prince Andrew in the scandal. But even these, and the scandal surrounding the late Princess Diana and her death, paled compared to the royal scandal which exploded into English headlines in 1936. The story of King Edward VIII and the American divorcee Wallis Simpson is a story in and of itself. For many Englishmen, including Edward's brother, the future George VI, and wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill, the scandal of the British king being married to an American woman who was divorced was almost too much to bear. The American part was not so bad. Churchill was a member of the aristocracy, and his mother was an American. However, in 1936, the divorce part was bad. At that time, in that country, in that culture, and in that ultra-upper-class society, a divorced woman was seen as a loose woman, without morals, discipline, or religion. Adding to Mrs. Simpson's problems, she was not well liked. She was seen as uncouth and a social climber, not someone suited to be Queen of England. The story is long and has been told many times. In the end, Edward believed marrying the woman he loved was more important than sitting on the throne. He abdicated as king, married Mrs. Simpson, and was effectively exiled to the Bahamas, serving as Governor-General with the title of Duke of Windsor until World War II ended, and then retiring to France. Edward died in 1972. That would be a big enough story on its own, except it seems that Edward was a bit of a fan of Hitler and Mussolini from both things he said before, during, and after the war. According to historian Andrew Lowney, Edward, at the very least, was pro-German before the war. So were many of England's upper class in the 1930s. In Edward's case, that may have run a bit deeper. After all, the British royal family has deep German roots. As World War I receded into memory and Germany was roiled by street fighting between left and right, many in Britain came to believe that the terms imposed on Germany after World War I, especially those dealing with the economy and the military, were too harsh. They also reckoned that a strong Germany would be a buffer against the threat of the Soviet Union further to the east. In both Edward's and Wallis's cases, these sentiments were echoed, as were statements made against the Jewish people in Germany and England. In his book, The Traitor King, Lowney asserts that even before the Simpson scandal, British politicians sought a way to nudge Edward aside. Therefore, his love for Mrs. Simpson was a convenient excuse to do so. To be fair to Edward, however, during the war, he showed himself to be a proper English patriot, at least in public. Much support for Edward's being pro-German, if not 100% pro-Nazi, came at the war's end. In April 1945, an American officer found an abandoned German military vehicle. Its occupants must have taken off in haste, attempting to escape justice or hostile fire by approaching US forces. In the vehicle were hundreds of documents, some signed by the Nazi foreign minister, the infamous Joachim von Ribbentrop, who was later executed for war crimes. A search of the surrounding area and the Marburg castle revealed even more secret documents. Several of these documents referred to a Nazi plan to use Edward as a puppet king. The plan shows a serious German lack in their understanding of British patriotism, for the idea was to stage a kidnapping of Edward and Wallis with his help. Then, the Nazis would threaten the former king and his wife harm unless the English agreed to put him on the throne and leave the Germans to have a free hand in Europe. These papers were dated 1940, when the Germans and English were locked in the desperately fought Battle of Britain. Hitler was said to have not wanted to fight against the English, who were a Germanic people. And this plan, which never would have worked, was a way to both avoid fighting the English and get what he wanted in Europe. The documents include references to Edward volunteering his services as a diplomat before he left for his exile in the Bahamas. Winston Churchill had fought for Edward to stay on the throne, but this would have been too much for the Prime Minister, who had already staked his place in history as a man who would fight to the last rather than surrender. After the war, American intelligence sent the documents to Churchill, who discussed them with Edward's brother, King George VI, father of Elizabeth II, who expressed the strong wish that the files be suppressed and never see the light of day. However, the existence of the files was well known, and some were made public in 1954, 1 year after the coronation of Elizabeth II, and again 3 years later. It is said that Edward was, to use English understatement, not pleased. Today, we often hear the word disappeared about missing opposition figures who have angered dictatorial governments. The term gained popularity in the 1970s, when the brutal government of Chilean General Augusto Pinochet cracked down on dissent within Chile. The disappeared, many of whom have never been found, alive or dead, were students, professors, journalists, politicians, and other vocal opponents of the regime. It was not until sometime after Pinochet's fall in 1990 that many of the disappeared were accounted for. Many had been tortured, and some had died of malnutrition or disease. Most had been shot in various secret locations throughout the country. Of course, the Chilean dictator was a fan of, you guessed it, Adolf Hitler. Though his regime had engaged in political murder and terror before the war began, in 1941 Hitler issued the infamous Nacht und Nebel Erlass, the Night and Fog Decree. After the war, the United States made a well-known film entitled Night and Fog to show the horrors of the Hitler regime and the Holocaust to the public back home. For many, Night and Fog was their first exposure to the horrors of Nazism. The Night and Fog Decree was aimed at the populations in Nazi-occupied territories. In it, Hitler announced that anyone deemed to be working or suspected of working against the regime should be imprisoned or murdered. Some victims were kidnapped on the street. No word of their whereabouts or fate was given to their families. If the prisoner lived for any length of time, he or she was not allowed any communication with the outside world. Moreover, prisoners were frequently told that their family and friends were the ones who had denounced them to the Nazis in the first place, further demoralizing them. There were 5 orders in the decree. The last 2 dealt with jurisdictional issues. The first paragraph states, in part, that the adequate punishment for offences against the German state or occupying power is on principle the death penalty. The second paragraph says that if the execution of prisoners could not be carried out promptly, most likely because the Nazis thought the prisoners had important information, they were to be sent to Germany. Finally, the third paragraph stated that even if the German military authorities asked about a night and fog prisoner, they were to be given no information other than the fact that they were arrested. Hitler did not name the decree. Instead, it developed that name over time. Another example of the Nazis' propensity for euphemism. Conversations between Gestapo officers went like this. A junior officer might ask, "What is to happen with prisoner X?" his commander would answer, he disappears into the night and fog. Einsatzgruppen means special action groups. In the morbid vernacular of the Nazis, special action meant killing. The Einsatzgruppen were formed by SS and Order Police troops in 1939 during the invasion of Poland. Their first targets were those suspected of being in the resistance or those likely to join: teachers, unionists, writers, socialists, etc. After Poland was occupied, the Einsatzgruppen began the wholesale murder of the Jewish people of Poland. After the June 22, 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union, millions of Jewish people there. The inhuman horror of Auschwitz and other extermination camps, with the gas chambers that killed thousands upon thousands of people a day at the height of the Holocaust, like insects, have caused another horrible aspect of the Holocaust to be relatively less known. This is what has been dubbed the Holocaust by bullets. It's estimated that the Einsatzgruppen killed more than 1.1 million Jewish people in Poland, the Baltic states, and the Soviet Union by shooting in little over a year. Convinced of the rightness of their cause and the need to show their results to SS chief Heinrich Himmler, the units of the Einsatzgruppen kept meticulous records. The most infamous of these reports came from an SS officer, Standartführer Karl Jäger, leading Einsatzkommando for Special Action Command, No. 3 of Einsatzgruppe A, operating in Lithuania. On page 6 of the Jäger report are totals of Jewish people killed in various towns and cities, listed by gender and whether they were adults or children. In addition, 137,346 lives were erased and buried in mass graves throughout the country. Reports from other regions where the Einsatzgruppe operated were similar, including maps to further illustrate the totals and the areas under Nazi control, which were Judenfrei, or free of Jews. There are many films and pictures of SS-Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler. There are even some home movies of him at Hitler's private home, the Berghof in Bavaria, but these have no sound. Himmler escaped Berlin towards the war's end, but was captured by British troops in northwest Germany shortly after. He was detained, but he committed suicide by biting a cyanide capsule hidden in his mouth before he could be interrogated. Most people have heard Hitler speak. Very few have heard the voice of the dreaded SS chief and the man who put Hitler's sick dream of the Holocaust into action. However, there is a recording. On October the 4th to the 6th, 1943, in today's Poznan, Poland, Himmler gave a series of speeches totaling 3 hours to a large group of SS officers. The original tapes are housed in the US National Archives in Maryland. For much of the speeches, Himmler talks about the glory of the SS, its organization, achievements, future, etc. He also talks about the war's progress. Though in 1943 things had turned against Germany, Himmler was still optimistic that Hitler could turn the situation around. When it was, the SS would play an essential role in the German colonization of the conquered territories. Finally, he speaks in damning detail about Soviet prisoners of war. It's estimated that nearly 3 million Soviet prisoners were killed in Nazi captivity, either on the spot or in camps. One should remember that the first victims of the Auschwitz gas chambers were Soviet POWs. Then Himmler comes to the Jewish question. He speaks of rumors back in Germany. I am now referring to the evacuation of the Jews, the extermination of the Jewish people. It's one of those things that is easily said. The Jewish people are being exterminated, says every party member. This is very obvious. It's in our program. Elimination of the Jews. Extermination. We're doing it. A small matter. Then goes on to say, most of you here know what it means when 100 corpses lie next to each other, when there are 500, or when there are 1,000. To have endured this and at the same time to have remained a decent person, with exceptions due to human weaknesses, has made us tough, and is a glorious chapter that has not and will not be spoken of. The next day, he told his officers, the difficult decision had to be made to have this people disappear from the earth. For the organization which had to execute this task, it was the most difficult which we had ever had. I felt obliged to you, as the most superior dignitary of the party, this political order, this political instrument of the Führer, to also speak about this question quite openly, and to say how it has been. The Jewish question in the countries that we occupy will be solved by the end of this year. Only remainders of odd Jews that managed to find hiding places will be left over. Hitler's personal secretary for the latter part of the war, Traudl Junge, survived the war and gave several interviews about Hitler's last days in the Führer bunker, before he committed suicide with his new wife, Eva Braun. Her character is one of the significant personalities in the famous movie Downfall, 2004. She was also the focus of the documentary Blind Spot, made just before her death in 2002. Traudl Junge witnessed much of what went on in Hitler's inner circle for the last part of the war, and, more importantly, what took place within the bunker as the Red Army closed in. She also had the dubious honor of taking the dictation for Hitler's last will and testament. Hitler was delusional to the end. He willed his art collection to what he believed would be a gallery opened in his hometown of Linz, Austria, and left items for his housekeepers, butlers, etc. He named Navy Chief Karl Dönitz as his successor, as he now viewed his number 2 and number 3 men, Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler, as traitors for having approached the Allies to negotiate a surrender. He also stated that he would commit suicide rather than be made a spectacle arranged by the Jews, and hoped that National Socialism would live after him. In her many interviews, Traudl Junge states her shock that his last testament was utterly devoid of any rationale or reasoning behind his actions, especially the killing of the Jewish people. Other than briefly saying that other nations had forced his hand and caused him to go to war to protect Germany, Hitler acted as if he were just in a lawyer's office giving away his property. This surprised her, for she was hoping that Hitler would give some statement about why all of this had to happen. Junge stated many times that Hitler was quite provincial in his outlook and might have been treating the will like any other provincial might at the end of his life. She also said that it was apparent that he was no longer in control of his faculties. We hope that you have enjoyed this video and learned something from it. Please like and subscribe, and be sure to click the notification button for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching.